Welcome back. The Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry last week held its half-year economic review where it assessed the developments in the business and the macroeconomic environment. Well, I'm now being joined by the Director General of the Chamber, Mr. Muda Yusuf, to talk more on that assessment. Good morning, Mr. Yusuf. Good to have you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure.
Right, you did your usual economic review last week. Now, let's begin with the macroeconomic performance so far this year. How well have the economy performed?
Yes, as business people, we worry about two major components of the economy. The macroeconomic side, which you mentioned, and the business environment issues. As far as the macroeconomic environment is concerned, that relates essentially to some of these key macroeconomic variables, like the GDP, which was, as at Q1, was about 2%, which is not bad compared to where we are coming from. The inflation rate, also still high at about 11.23%, but has been steadily declining, but gradually. So that, again, I think we feel fairly comfortable with. The external reserves at $47 billion as of July. That, again, gives some level of comfort, So generally, on the macroeconomic front, things look to be a bit more comfortable or give some level of confidence, But the key challenge is more on the business environment side. Because if the macroeconomic side is good and the business environment continues to pose serious challenges, particularly with respect to the impact on the cost of doing business, that remains a challenge. That means we still worry about issues of energy, for instance. We're all witnesses to all the issues between the DISCOs and the Minister of Power, a lot of exchange back and forth. Issues of transportation is still there. Issues of the ports, the gridlock. Thank God for the visit of the Vice President and the intervention of the Governor of Lagos State. But by and large, the problems are still there. So it's still a major issue for business. Of course, we have issues, although being addressed by the PEBEC office with regulatory agencies, the customs and some of these other regulatory agencies. So it's work in progress as far as the business environment is concerned. The PEBEC office have been doing its best to improve on the ease of doing business. A lot of work is being done, but a lot of work still needs to be done.
Okay. Yeah. Now, in your review, you commended the CBN on the outcome of the last MPC meeting. Now, what are the specific areas of your commendation?
Yeah, the CBN, we have been having issues with interest rate. And it's a major advocacy issue for us in the business community because we feel that interest rate in this economy is not good for business. Although there are arguments on both sides, portfolio investors, inflation, exchange rate stability, and so on. But as far as business is concerned, the pressure of cost of fund is very high. So why we commend the CBN is that the CBN is coming up with some innovative interventions. Apart from the development finance intervention that we have, these intervention funds here and there. At the last MPC meeting, we had this initiative that will allow large corporates to issue commercial papers.
Yeah, that's taking the quantitative easing.
Yes, yeah. To issue commercial papers, and I'm hoping that it will be at a rate that will be possibly single digit. And the CBN gave an undertaking that if need be, the CBN can even buy up that commercial paper. So I think that window of opportunity for low-cost financing is something that we need to commend, and we actually commend it. Then the second issue that we also took note of, which we also feel is commendable, is the introduction of the adjusted CRR. In other words, we have a kind of dynamic adjustment of CRR to reflect the lending by the banks. In other words, the more you lend to the real sector, the more concession you have on the CRR. That's the cash reserve requirement. So the CBN provides liquidity that is commensurate to the lending to the real sector. That, again, I think is commendable. And that window, the CBN said, is going to be at 9% interest rate, and it's going to be of a tenure of about 7 years, with 2 years moratorium. That, I think, is also good for the real sector. However, we want to also appeal or recommend that such interventions should not be limited to just manufacturing and agriculture, because there are other sectors that also support this real sector. They also need funding. For instance, there are people who are off-takers, either in agric or in manufacturing, because you cannot manufacture and also sell. You cannot manufacture and transport. Some other players in the economy have to play some role, even in the value chain of the real sector. So this kind of gesture should be extended to such operators within the economy, because we need to see the economy in a more holistic manner. And for as long as every player is bringing something to the table in terms of job creation, in terms of revenue, in terms of income, in terms of tax, I think all sectors need to be supported, because they also play complementary role to the real sector.
Okay, talking about the CRR, in your review, you also complained about how the CRR is being managed by the central bank. So what are your concerns there?
Yeah, the concerns we have with the way the CRR is administered has to do with the flexibility of it. Because the whole concept of CRR is to make it a percentage of the cash or the deposit that a bank has. In other words, the CRR is 22.5%. If there is an increase in the cash deposits, in absolute terms, the amount of CRR that will be with the CBN will increase. But if your CRR, if your cash deposit drops, the amount of cash that should be with the CBN should also drop, so that you maintain that relativity or that statutory provision of 22%. But what we have seen is that if there's an increase in deposit, the CRR goes up. But when your deposit drops, you are not credited. The banks are not credited. So the CRR seems to be sticky downwards in terms of crediting the banks as their cash deposit drops. So that sometimes creates situations where the CRR of some banks could be even as high as 30%, 40%, depending on how the level of their cash and deposit base that they have. So what we are suggesting or appealing to the CBN to do is to make it more flexible, so that the statutory provision of that 22.5% will be maintained at all times. That will help to also ensure the kind of liquidity that we like to see in the economy.
Okay, you alluded to the proposal to legislate CSR by the National Assembly. So what is the perspective of the LCCI?
Well, it's interesting, because in your last interview with LC, so we were talking about CSR, and it's a very good thing. A lot of businesses are already in that space, doing great things voluntarily. So our position is that there is no need to legislate CSR.
Okay, let it be a voluntary.
It has to be voluntary. And we also suggest that we should have a framework to provide incentives, so that a lot of corporates, many more corporate bodies will be encouraged to undertake CSR program. What has happened is that there's a proposal, I think, in the House of Rep, sponsored by one of the honorable members, that there should be a legislation that will impose some kind of tax on companies for purposes of CSR. A threshold of about, I think, 50 million profit or something is being proposed in that bill. So what we are saying is that it is not desirable to have that kind of legislation. As much as possible, the corporate social responsibility activities should be voluntary. Yeah. And there could be a framework of incentives to encourage companies to undertake CSR. That is the position that we hold. Okay.
Yeah. Now, you expressed concern about the excise duty position, but you know that government, of course, needs revenue. So what's the worry about
needs revenue?
Duty? Yeah.
But again, in tax administration, we have to be careful, so that we don't, in the process of trying to chase revenue, do more harm to the economy. Because there's a sense in some instances where the revenue you make will cost the economy even much more in other areas. Because we are talking about job creation, we are talking about equity, we are talking about building an inclusive economy. If you focus too much on raising revenue, you could do a lot more damage to the economy. So in this particular instance, excise duty is a tax on domestic production. And we know what it is to be in production in this economy. If there is any sector that is most vulnerable today, is the sector that is involved in production. Be it manufacturing, be it agriculture, be it solid minerals. These sectors are facing a lot of challenges, which are well known anyway. The cost of operation in these sectors are so high. We have the energy issues that they have to contend with. Diesel is over 200 naira per liter. The power sector is still very epileptic. Then we have issues, the gridlock is still there. We have issues with agencies like the customs and all the rest. We have issues with logistics, transportation. And already it's not as if they are even not paying tax. They are paying a lot of taxes already. So at this time, to now be contemplating imposing excise duty, I don't think it's fair. Many of these companies have not recovered from the shock of exchange rate depreciation that took place about 2 years ago. Many of them are still struggling to recover from that. So our appeal is that any talk about excise duty should be stepped down for now. If you cannot support the real sector or the manufacturing sector at this time, we should not add to the burden of production because the challenges are enormous. So our appeal is that for now, the government should step down any consideration of issue of excise duty on domestic production because the challenges are enormous. So that is the position we hold as far as the issue of excise duty is concerned.
Okay, you also noted some challenges with the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme. Can you share your insight on this?
You know, the ETLS, which you call ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme, is supposed to allow for free trade, you know, within the sub-region. It's an economic integration concept. And for you to be able to trade under the ETLS, you must register your products under the ETLS. So the complaint that operators have is first the bureaucracy of registration of ETLS. Sometimes it could take as long as 1 year before you get a product registered under ETLS. That is not good for business. That is not in tune with the issue of ease of doing business. It's not in tune with the economic recovery and growth plan of the government. So we are requesting or urging the authorities concerned that we need to have a smarter way of dealing with issues of the ETLS. Secondly, the ETLS doesn't have to be in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have the Federal Ministry of Trade and Investment. We have the NIPC, the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission. We have the one-stop shop. So something as critical as the ETLS should be domiciled in those areas, particularly NIPC, so that you can have a smarter way of doing it. And all these things we should even be able to do online. Right now, you have to pack all sorts of documents to Abuja. They say the committee meets once in a quarter or thereabout. That is not in tune with the kind of speed with which we want to move at this time. So there has to be speedy consideration of all these applications for ETLS. It has to be a smarter way of processing them. These things should be able to be done online. The cost of doing it and the bureaucracy needs to be reduced. And we believe that if we move the consideration or the processing of the ETLS to the NIPC, to the one-stop shop, we think that things could move faster. And that will be more in tune with the ease of doing business agenda of the government.
Okay, just a quick one. What's your outlook now?
Well, the outlook is looking positive except for the political developments that are happening. And in this respect, we want to appeal to all the critical agencies involved in the election to ensure that there is credibility in the process. Integrity of INEC, integrity and credibility of the security agencies, and integrity and credibility of the judiciary. These three key institutions are very, very critical to what happens in the political environment. And what happens in the political environment also invariably affects the economy.
Sure. All right, thank you very much for your time, Mr. Muda Yusuf.
Thank you very much,
Muda Yusuf is the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. After the break, we'll review current performance at the NSE. Do stay with us.